Honors Pre-Calculus 2013 Final Exam Review. This is number 54. It says, the directions I think are a little confusing here, the way this is written. It says, give the amplitude, period, vertical shift, and or phase shift as necessary. And then it says, period and amplitude of y equals 3 cosine 1/4 x. So really, all of this up here is not necessary. They're really asking us to give the period and amplitude of y equals 3 cosine 1/4 x. So one thing that will be generally important to know is that we have a general formula for a sine curve. And this applies to sine or a cosine. So we can say y equals a sine of bx plus c plus d. And then when we do that, the absolute value of this number a is the amplitude. The b is also called omega, and it's the frequency. The c is used to find the phase shift. And in fact, we have a formula for the phase shift, which is also represented by the Greek letter phi for phase, and it's equal to negative c over b. And then this last bit here is the vertical shift. Doesn't have any fancy Greek name or letter. It's just a vertical shift. So these four parameters, they're called parameters, determine the properties of the sine function. And we can find things like the amplitude, the frequency. And by the way, the period is not represented here directly, but the period, which is also called the wavelength, and is represented by the Greek letter lambda. Sometimes physicists use a capital letter T. And the relationship between frequency and wavelength is this, that the lambda is equal to 2 pi over omega. So if we know the omega, we can divide into 2 pi and get the period. Now the problem that we've been given is y equals 3 cosine 1/4 x. Y equals 3 cosine 1/4 x. And I've put that 1/4 x in parentheses, which I think is really the more proper way to write that. Otherwise, we don't know if it isn't cosine of 1/4 times x. In fact, if you put this in the calculator exactly like this, your calculator will assume you mean 3 times the cosine of 1/4 times x. And that's not what you mean at all. You mean 3 times the cosine of the quantity 1/4 x. In my opinion, we should be explicit about that. All right, so now we've been asked to find the period and the amplitude. The period and the amplitude. Well, the amplitude is easiest to find because it's just the number in front, the coefficient of the sine or cosine function. So the amplitude is the absolute value of 3, which is just 3. So I want to remember, if I had a negative 3 here, I would still say the amplitude is 3. The amplitude is always positive. And then for the period, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this number, which is the omega. Omega equals 1/4, or the frequency is 1/4. So since the frequency equals 1/4, and lambda, the wavelength, is equal to 2 pi over omega, the frequency, that's 2 pi over 1/4. So now we have this nice complex fraction to deal with. The way I do it is we're going to take that denominator and flip it over and multiply. So the 2 pi is going to stay 2 pi. We could put that 2 pi over 1 if we want. And then the 1/4, we're going to flip it over and make it 4 over 1. And that's equal to 8 pi. So our period is 8 pi. Our amplitude is 3. And that is all we need to do for number 54.